Thank you very much. Maybe first I can talk about the National Anti-Corruption Strategy first, just to give a background. This is actually the second National Anti-Corruption Strategy and Action Plan, which is actually planned to run between 2021 to 2025. And this is actually the second strategy that Namibia has actually developed and actually embarked on its implementation. This strategy was actually approved by Cabinet on the 9th of December 2021 and subsequently launched by the Right Honorable Prime Minister Sarah Madila on the 16th of March 2022. This strategy actually has 8 strategic objectives, which actually are to be implemented by different institutions. And I want to make it clear that this is not the anti-corruption strategy, but it's actually a national anti-corruption strategy, which is actually a national document which is ought to be implemented by various stakeholders from different sectors. And the 8 strategic objectives that we have in this strategy, we have the strategic objective number 1, maybe I can go through, that actually expect an increment in the level of political accountability and transparency. Also, strategic objective number 2 looks at preventing corruption in government offices, ministries, agencies, public enterprises, regional councils, local and traditional authorities. This second one is actually expanded from the first National Anti-Corruption Strategy because it's also now inclusive of the traditional authorities. And we have strategic objective number 3 that actually looks at strengthening efforts to deter corruption. And 4 speaks about conducting extensive anti-corruption education, which actually ought to be done by different institutions, inclusive of civil societies. We also have strategic objective number 5 that speaks about enhanced measures and increased accountability to prevent corruption in the private sector. Number 6 speaks about civil society, non-governmental organizations, as well as the media are actually ought to implement this strategic objective in effort to curb corruption in our country. Strategic number 7, preventing corruption and promoting accountability in sports fraternity. This one is also one of the strategic objectives that were actually added to the National Anti-Corruption Strategy and Action Plan. And our 8th strategic objective speaks about enhancing engagement participation of youth in anti-corruption programs. And those are actually the 8 strategic objectives that ought to be implemented by different institutions during the period of 2021 to 2025.
All right. Now, Josephina, the ACC faces a lot of criticism in terms of the cases it focuses on, with many feeling that, it targets small-scale corruption activities and hardly, if ever, targets cases committed by those in higher powers, with large sums of money that basically go unaccounted for. Given this notion, does the NACSAP set out strategies on changing this public perception?
I'm just not sure on what angle are you taking this. Is it maybe influencing it in a positive way or a negative way? But I can take it from this angle that the NACSAP is actually helping the Anti-Corruption Commission in fighting corruption. It's basically enhancing our efforts in the fight against corruption. This means that because it's only not us as an individual institution expected to implement this National Anti-Corruption Strategy, and it's including different sectors, civil society, traditional authorities, faith-based organizations. We're talking about the youth, we're talking about the media in particular. They're expected to bring their all to this strategy and make sure that it's implemented to its full capacity. And by it being implemented to its full capacity, that means that Namibia will be on par with the international framework, with the international expectation, and also the African expectation as to how we're supposed to be in terms of fighting corruption. As I've actually alluded to the strategic objective, you saw that it requires many institutions to come through and help the country fight corruption. So then I can say that in actual, the NACSAP actually will help the country to be in line with all that is required, and it also contributes to the attainment of the Harambee Prosperity Plan in terms of good governance and transparency.
Mm-hmm. Now, another challenge faced by the ACC is the lack of funding from the shareholders, and equally, will this be an opportunity to change your plan in accordance with your budget?
Budget for us, though we say that budget will never be enough, given that of different cases that we deal with that normally requires different plans to tackle them, and also the investigation, which is actually varies based on cases that we dealt with, would say that irregardless of what the funds we get, the Anti-Corruption Commission actually strives to do more with the little or limited resources that is accorded to it, and also. We can say that all the time or every year, government really tries to prioritize the funding of the Anti-Corruption Commission. As we know that government always have the midterm budget review, and most of the time we are actually catered for. And for us, we don't really see the need to change or limit our planning because should you limit on your planning, so what are you trying to achieve? You might not end up not achieving what you're supposed to achieve. So we try to do more with the little that we get, or we try to do more with less. So I can put it that way.
All right. Now, with regards to the meeting, how imperative is it, for the steering committee, especially in making sure that it stays on par with the organization's set goals?
It's very, very important for this meeting because if we look at the National Steering Committee, this is actually one of the structures in the implementation of this strategy. And this committee serves as a monitoring body, which is responsible for setting direction for the strategy, for the implementation of this strategy, and it's also there to advise all other structures in the strategy. All other structures, I mean that we have the clusters. We have 4 clusters that were divided in achieving the strategic objectives. And we have the regional forums that are also expected to report back and be monitored by this body, which is the National Steering Committee. So it's very important. And during this meeting tomorrow, the steering committee is going to be actually briefed on the progress that has been made so far since the implementation of the second national anti-corruption strategy. So it's very important for them to listen to what has been achieved so far, and also advise on the way forward, advise on how this strategy can be implemented moving forward. This is actually looking at the challenges that have been maybe encountered so far, looking at how they can, what plans they can come up with to accelerate the implementation of the strategy. Maybe I can also highlight as to what has been done, maybe to understand as to why important for the steering committee as a monitoring body to be actually briefed. What happened in the first few months of implementing the strategy is that we had a responsibility, or implementing institutions had a responsibility of nominating a focal person. And also they had a responsibility of contributing to the monitoring and evaluation plan. And also they had a responsibility to partake in quarterly cluster meetings, and also hosting the regional forums, and all that each and every activity plan had its own challenges, and meaning that we have some institutions that are not really owning up this whole process, and we have some institutions that are really serious and are really owning up the whole implementation. So it's for the monitoring body now to listen to what are the challenges that's been faced so far, and for them to advise and encourage the institution really to come forth and own the whole process of implementing the National Anti-Corruption Strategy and Action Plan.
All right. Now, kindly highlight some of these challenges that are set to be addressed during the meeting, and perhaps the foreseeable outcome on how the steering committee will continue to monitor progress being made in fighting against corruption.
Thank you very much. Like I mentioned earlier, that some of the challenges experienced so far is the fact that some of the institutions are not really owning up the whole process, because it's actually recommended that institutions do align their strategic plan and annual plans to the actions is actually contained in the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, because this strategy contains, apart from the strategic objective, each strategic objective contains actions that are supposed to be implemented by institutions. So it's actually advised that all the institutions that ought to implement the NACSAP align their strategic plans, annual plans, as we have seen that at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of the government financial year, most of the institutions, they started to develop, to review their old strategic plan and develop new strategic plan. So it's actually the right time for all the institutions to align their strategic planning and annual plans to the implementation of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. and also owner up, because that also will help them to be able to budget for those actions, to be able to budget for all the activities that are actually required from them in terms of implementing the national anti-corruption strategy. And ownership also as well. We want institutions to own the whole process, not to see this strategy as the Anti-Corruption Commission. See it as a national document. It's a national strategy which requires every person to bring their hands on board for us to be able to achieve our vision of a corrupt-free country. So mostly the challenges is mostly the ownership from the implementing institution, and also the slow progress when it comes to providing what is required. I can talk about the nomination of the focal person. We still have some institutions that have not nominated their focal persons. But actually through this meeting we are expecting the committee to come up with a plan that will assist the institution, understand, that will assist the institution really come on board and contribute as required of them. Also, in addition to this committee, to the steering committee, as the coordinating institution, the Anti-Corruption Commission did so much so far, just to see how best we can assist the implementing institution to understand the NACSAP, the implementing institution to understand their duty. For us also to nurture and establish a nurture relationship with these implementing institutions. What we did is that we engaged, we did a courtesy visit to regional governors in most of the regions, and so far we have consulted 9 of the 14 regions. And what we are currently doing as well, which also ought to get blessing from the steering committee, is to actually engage institutions to have a one-on-one with different institutions, which we so far did, I think, with few institutions. We did consult them one-on-one, and past the steering committee meeting, this engagement shall continue to ensure that the institution come really on board.
Josephina, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, that was the Public Relations Officer of the Anti-Corruption Commission, Josephina Ngitwamata, talking to us about the National Steering Committee meeting that is set to take place tomorrow. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back shortly with health and entertainment.